people who are going to be really successful in the future are willing to make sacrifices in the present in order to guarantee that future. And by sacrifices, we mean they're willing to put in the long hours. They're willing to get up earlier. They're willing to work harder. They're willing to stay later. They're willing to invest and save their money, even though they don't have a lot, knowing that with compound interest, it will grow and grow over time. They're willing to spend an enormous amount of time investing in their children, knowing that this investment in their children in time and love and affection and support will pay off for decades and generations, even into the lives of their children and grandchildren. So sacrifice is the critical word, and sacrifice means that you have the ability to discipline yourself. You have the ability to delay gratification in the short term so that you can enjoy far greater rewards in the long term. And the wonderful thing is when you practice self-discipline, especially in exercise, for example, but even in hard work, your brain releases endorphins. And endorphins are called nature's happy drug. And it actually makes you happy to practice self-discipline, to take control of yourself and make yourself do the right thing and complete it. You feel good about yourself in the moment. And of course, the effect that it has on your future can be tremendous. Now, some years ago, a businessman named Herbert Gray did a long-time study, it was kind of his project, to find out what he called the common denominator of success. He said the common denominator of success was quite simple. He said, successful people, he found, make a habit of doing what unsuccessful people don't like to do. And of course, the logical question is, well, what is it that unsuccessful people don't like to do? Well, it turned out to be the same thing that successful people don't like to do either, but they do it anyway because they recognize that that's the price of success. A simple thing like exercising, going for a run or a walk at the end of the day. Well, do people like to do this? Do we look forward to exertion and perspiration and sweating and straining and everything else? No, we don't look forward to it, but we do it because we recognize that this is the price of looking and feeling fit, trim, living a long life, taking good care of our bodies, and so on. So remember, the same things that unsuccessful people don't like to do are things you don't like to do either. And again, it comes back to our favorite word, sacrifice. Being willing to pay the price in the present to enjoy the great rewards in the future.
So the master key to riches is self-discipline. What are the 7 personal qualities that assure success? Number 1, you must know yourself and know exactly what it is you want in life. Goal orientation is an essential requirement of all successful people. And as we'll talk about later, we know lack of goal orientation goes hand in hand with failure in every single walk of life. Somebody should be able to wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning and ask you, what is your major definite purpose in life? What is your number 1 goal? What do you want to accomplish more than anything else in the next 3 to 5 years? And you should be able to wake up out of a sound sleep and tell that person instantly. You must know it crystal clear. We know that our goals always determine the direction that we go in life. I was reading something by Thoreau last night. It says that you should go confidently in the direction of your dreams. It says that try to live the life that you have imagined for yourself, and you will be astonished at how far and how fast you actually go in life if you always try to live consistent with your dreams about yourself for the future. And Conrad Hilton said that you've got to have a dream if you want to make a dream come true. Most self-made millionaires compare themselves to billionaires. Most people starting their businesses compare themselves to millionaires. But once they get to be millionaire status, they start to compare themselves to billionaires, and they think, geez, look how poorly I'm doing in comparison to the billionaires. But in every case, it's the vision that is the activating force. The greater, the more compelling, the more burning that vision, that idea of where you want to go and what you want to do. We find that companies that achieve great things always have somebody in the company who has a mission, who wants to do something really important. I was talking to a gentleman at the university not long ago who spent 25 years, from the time he entered biochemistry in his late teens, he spent 25 years, and his whole dream in life was to make a major contribution to DNA research, the basic molecule of all of human life. That's all he wanted to do. And for 25 years, he had that as a vision and as a mission. And in the 25th year, he made a major breakthrough, which has now put him in line for a Nobel Prize. And he'll probably go down in history as one of the great biochemists of this century. And This is what kept a person going for 25 years, was the mission. The ability to focus. Very important. The ability to focus, as we've said and we'll say over again, is the absolute critical requirement for success. People say, geez, I don't know if I can be as successful as other people are because they have more advantages and more benefits and more intelligence and so on. Don't you believe it. A person who is focused, of average intelligence, can run circles around a person who is a genius who doesn't have the focus. That is why people come out of the universities with PhD degrees and with master's degrees and with sometimes 5, 10, 15 years of advanced education, and they can barely make a living, and other people quit school in grade 10 and grade 11, and they come out of school and 5 or 10 years later they have their own successful businesses. It's not the basic talents, although talents are important and education is important. It's the ability to focus the talents that you have like an arrow, if you like a sniper, to be able to hit specific targets. And that's why you don't have to think of yourself in terms of limitations. Many of us hesitate about going ahead in business because we think that somehow we lack the talents and abilities. We look at other people who are successful in their businesses and we think those people must have unique capabilities. It's only when you get to know these people and meet these people that you begin to realize that they're no different from you or I. The only difference between a successful business person, or let us say a person who has launched a business and one who has not, is what? Is the person who's launched the business has done it. The person who has not has not. And I've seen this by studying, if you'd like, hundreds if not thousands of entrepreneurs. All right, the next personal quality that assures success is you must determine the price that you will have to pay in order to be successful, and then resolve to pay that price. For every single thing you want in life, there's a price. And there's a price that has to be paid, and nature always demands that the price be paid in advance. And the price is invariably hard work. There is no substitute for hard work. Many people say, well, geez, look at that person, they got the nice house and the nice car. You never realize that behind the scenes, that person was probably working 16, 18 hours a day, probably for 5 years before they got their break and 5 years after they got their break. All you see in the end result is the nice house and the nice car. The reason I mention this is sometimes people start a business, they think, well, sure, I'll have to work a couple of extra hours a day. And as somebody once told me, when you start your own business, you only have to work half the time. You only have to work half days from then on. And you can decide which 12 hours it's going to be. In a recent study, they found that in our society, you work 8 hours a day for survival. And everything over that, you work for success. If you're only working 8 hours a day, you won't do anything more than survive. Every additional hour, whether you're working for yourself or someone else, is for success. And so it's very important that you keep putting in those additional hours, whether it's extra reading, extra study, extra work. Number 3 characteristic is self-responsibility. You have to accept 100% responsibility for your life and for everything that you are or ever will be. Our great old saying, if it's to be, it's up to me. Very important. And the opposite of accepting full responsibility is making excuses. And many people have said that making excuses is a disease that is fatal to success.
In the military academies, I think it's worldwide, it's the same. But in the military academies, whenever you are confronted with a senior officer and you have, let us say you have your tie is askew or your jacket is not ironed, they'll say, "Cadet, why is your jacket unironed?" And you're only allowed to give one of 3 answers. Yes, sir, no excuse. You are not allowed to say any other words to a senior officer except, yes, sir, I will do it. No, sir, I didn't do it. And no excuses, sir. And that's how they train the top officers in the world, is yes, sir, no excuses. Because they know that nothing makes a person weaker or littler than always making excuses. You just sound awful. You just sound incompetent. No leader could be a leader if all they did was make excuses. There is a turning point in your life where you become an adult or you remain a child. And it's like a line that you cross. You come up to this line, and on one side of the line, other side of the line is responsibility, where you are now responsible for the rest of your life. On this side of the line is blaming others for your problems. Blaming is the major source of negative emotions and unhappiness and stress and failure. Accepting responsibility is the major reason for happiness, personal power, and success. When you step across the line, you say, from now on, I accept complete responsibility for my life and for everything that happens to me. If you have a goal, you accept responsibility for achieving the goal. If you have a problem, you accept responsibility for solving the problem. But whatever happens, you don't blame other people. Blaming makes you weak and angry. It makes you feel inferior and insecure. Henry Ford once gave this motto for success, and I use it all the time. I love it. It's never complain, never explain.
Number 5, you must be willing to work hard, to go the extra mile, and to always do more than you're paid for. One of the major secrets of success is always do more than you're paid for, and then you will always be paid more than what you're getting now. And number 6, you must use your time well every minute, every hour, every day. Remember, this life is not a rehearsal for anything else in life. This is the real thing. And all successful business people, all self-made millionaires, look upon their time as a resource, and they're very careful with it. They spend their time the way they would spend money.
Time equals money. Time equals money. If a person asks you for a certain amount of time, or if an activity takes a certain amount of time, ask yourself, how much money would you be willing to exchange for the successful completion of that activity? If you want to earn a certain amount of money, ask yourself, how much of your time are you willing to spend? How much of your money are you willing to contribute? Successful people always look at time and money, and they realize that the two are interchangeable. Now here's another important point. You can invest time to get more money. You can invest money to get more time. And time and money put together equal happiness. Happiness, or life, we can call it life, but basically happiness is a better word. So always exchange time for happiness. Always exchange money for happiness. Always realize that they're interchangeable and that you can either invest them or you can spend them. If you invest them, you'll have a return. If you spend them, then they're gone forever.
And finally, number 7,
the most important single thing that happens in life is the ability to spot trends and to be aware of changes and where the changes are going. In a recent Fortune magazine article on why companies fail, they said one of the major reasons for failure is the failure to anticipate how changes are going to affect their business and to go on doing things the same way.
And what we have found, the series of articles in Inc. magazine, they were interviewing people who'd become fabulously successful, rags to riches stories. Every one of them said the only reason I succeeded is because I developed the habit of always looking for the opportunity. It's really quite astonishing. I remember reading a story of a serial entrepreneur, and he'd made many millions of dollars in different businesses. And one day he was reading the Wall Street Journal, and it said imports of Italian racing bicycles increased 37% in the last 12 months. And that's what it was, just a little thing from one of the Department of Trade publications. So he said, 37% growth rate, that's pretty good. He said, I wonder why that is. So he started to do some research. And what he found was, this is many years ago, is Italian racing bicycles, which is very popular today, were almost unknown in the U.S. He got in touch with the major Italian bicycle manufacturers. He opened a store. He imported the bicycles. He advertised, and they started to sell. By the time he was finished, he had 32 stores selling Italian bicycles by the shipload, and he made something like $15, $20 million before he sold the business. It all came from just noticing that little notice. But the thing is, he was looking for the notice. He was looking for ideas. So keep your mind open. So there are two obstacles to becoming everything you are capable of becoming. Obstacle number 1 is homeostasis. It means that you become rigid and fixed in the way that you think. Homeostasis is another rephrasing of the comfort zone. It's a major reason that people don't grow. It's because they get locked into what they've already done in the past, and they're very uneasy about doing something new. And you're not willing to try new things. And so be alert to these. The natural tendency to slip into a comfort zone and fight to stay there, and the natural tendency to resist new ideas. In order to get yourself out of the comfort zone, they found that if I like to use an example like this. When Warren Bennis did his study called Leaders, which was one of the best-selling book on leadership of the 90s, they studied 93 leaders, and they studied them for 5 years to find out what qualities they had that made them different. And they were completely different industries, and they found there were 5. And one of them was they refused to get stuck in a comfort zone. And so what they did is they would get into a comfort zone. We say the only difference between a comfort zone and a rut is the depth. No, between a rut and a grave is the depth. And where they would get into this comfort zone very quickly, and the only way they could get out is by using a grappling hook, if you like, and throwing a grappling hook up to pull themselves out of the comfort zone, and it was always a big goal. And so what you do is by creating a big goal, you're forced out of your comfort zone because you cannot stay at your current level of performance and set a big goal for yourself. The goal forces you to think bigger, which is why we talked about putting a 0 at the end of your income goal. It forces you. There's no way that you can achieve that doing what you're now doing. You're going to have to do something different, and you're going to have to do it in a different place in a different way.
Learn to see the opportunity that's right around you. It's easy to get busy and sort of blinded and just walk along and not see what's possible and what's available.
Now here's the interesting thing. I was listening to somebody who grew up in a small town, and he was talking about this interesting point. He said he came from a poor family, and there were 3 families in that town that owned everything. They owned the mill, and they owned the factory, and they owned the general store, and they owned the shipping, and they owned the trucking, and they owned the agricultural processing. They owned everything. And these 3 families were rich. They had beautiful homes. Everybody revered them and talked about them, and they were on the bank boards and everything else. And he went to school with the kids from these 3 families, and everybody wanted to be their friends. Of course, you remember those days. And he found that they were quite normal kids. They weren't very different from anybody else. But somehow these families owned everything. And it was a real shock to him. It wasn't their education, because they weren't getting a better education than he was. They weren't their grades, because the grades were the same. It certainly wasn't their physical attractiveness or anything else. It was just one thing. They had an attitude of looking for opportunities and possibilities.
It takes imagination, creative imagination, to know that diamonds don't look like diamonds in their rough state, nor does a pile of iron ore look like iron or steel. Great opportunities lurk constantly in every aspect of the work in which we now find ourselves. In the year 1843, a man was born who, during his lifetime, was to have a profound effect on millions of people. His name was Russell Herman Conwell. One day, a group of boys came to Dr. Conwell at his church and asked him if he would be willing to instruct them in college courses. They wanted a college education, but lacked the money to pay for it. He told them that he'd do all he could, and as the boys left, a thought, an idea began to form in Dr. Conwell's mind. He asked himself, why couldn't there be a fine college for poor but deserving young men? Well, here was a great idea, and he went to work on it at once. Almost single-handedly, Dr. Conwell raised $7 million with which he founded one of the world's leading universities. And he raised the money by giving more than 6,000 lectures all over the country, and in each one of them, he told the story called Acres of Diamonds. The story was the account of an African farmer who heard tales about other settlers who had made millions by discovering diamond mines. And these tales so excited the farmer that he could hardly wait to sell his farm and search for diamonds himself. So he sold his farm and spent the rest of his life wandering the vast African continent, searching unsuccessfully for the gleaming gems which brought such high prices on the markets of the world. Finally, in a fit of despondency, broke and desperate, as I remember the story, he threw himself into a river and drowned. Now, meanwhile, the man who had bought his farm one day found a large and unusual stone in a stream which cut through the property. And the stone turned out to be a great diamond of enormous value. And he then discovered that the farm was covered with them, and it was to become one of the world's richest diamond mines. The first farmer had owned literally acres of diamonds, but had sold them for practically nothing in order to look for them elsewhere. If he'd only taken the time to study and prepare himself, to learn what diamonds looked like in their rough state, and had first thoroughly explored the land he owned, he would have found the millions he sought right on his own property. The thing about this story that so profoundly affected Dr. Conwell and subsequently millions of others was the idea that each of us is, at this moment, standing in the middle of his own acres of diamonds. If we will only have the wisdom and patience to intelligently and effectively explore the work in which we're now engaged, we'll usually find that it contains the riches we seek, whether they be financial or intangible or both.